In This Corner, the podcast, 125. Boxing's biggest names, boxing's biggest stories, boxing's biggest fights. We cover it all with style and panache. Boxing's greatest memories and moments, and we do it with my pugilistic partner, the one and only boxing writer, author, CompuBox counter, and historian. He is Lee Groves. How you doing, Lee?
Doing well. Thank God there's only one of me.
Yeah, that's right. But you wear a plethora of hats on this program and with your other stuff you do in the world of boxing. So we're going to do some reviews and previews, and we're going to do some memories and moments, of course. That'll be, give us a little tease on that one. Your tease will be longer than the subject matter, probably.
Yeah, for sure, especially since we're talking about the June 27th, 1988 bout between Mike Tyson and Michael Spinks. It's a fight that was sort of built up for more than a year. It was a very highly anticipated bout. But once the bell rang, it was done quick.
Yeah, and I was at that fight. We'll get a chance to talk about it. Look forward to that. And I look forward to our very special guest. He is now an International Boxing Hall of Famer in the Observer category. He got in a couple of weeks ago. Wally Matthews will join us in the next segment. But let's start talking about some of the fights that took place and that are going to take place. And even there's a tornado warning in there as well. I'll let you get into all of that. Go right ahead.
All right, well, we'll start with the two cards that took place last Friday, June 21st. And the co-main event of the ESPN card pitted undefeated Andres Cortes, the number 2 contender at 130 in the WBO, and Abraham Nova, who was last seen losing a heartbreaking split decision against WBC 130-pound champion O'Shaquie Foster. And for those reasons, this was a crossroads fight. And many observers, including myself, thought that Nova did more than enough to win. But all three judges, veterans Dave Moretti, Patricia Morse-Jarman, and Glenn Feldman, saw differently, and Cortes was announced as the winner. 97-93 twice, I believe, and 96-94. I thought those scores were more appropriate for Nova.
So was it that egregious? I didn't watch it.
It was bad. It was pretty bad. I thought that Nova had control of the second half of the fight, mostly because of his work rate and his ring generalship, but they saw it differently. And explain
to me why you always have a reason or an explanation, perhaps even an excuse. And you had what you think these judges get caught up in that you appropriately call
aggressor's derangement syndrome. Voting for the guy who is coming forward. In the United States, effective aggression is very much weighted into the scoring of rounds, and Cortes, for better or worse, was coming forward. Unfortunately, he had a swollen face. He missed weight by 3/4 pounds. Things just weren't looking good for him, especially in the second half of the fight. And this decision also impacted the career trajectories for both men, as these decisions often do. Instead of earning a potential rematch with Foster, Nova now has lost 3 of his last 5 fights. And Cortes now, will probably get the title shot against the champion. And since Cortes missed weight by 3/4 pound, one has to wonder, should he get that title shot, whether he can make the weight in a healthy manner. This fight and that decision really left a sour taste with me and a lot of people. And once again, it looks like we're probably not going to see any public accountability for the scorecards. That's one of the big things that really rankle casual sports fans about boxing in general.
Now we'll move on to the main event.
Yeah, the main event, however, took the judges completely out of the equation as Rafael Espinoza stopped number 2 contender Sergio Sanchez in round 4 to retain his WBO featherweight title. At 6 feet 1 inches tall, Espinoza is the tallest man ever to claim a share of the featherweight championship. But like our previous guests, David Benavides and Sebastian Fundura, Espinoza is a tall guy who loves to be aggressive, and he loves to fight inside. That wood chipper attack produced knockdowns in rounds 1, 3, and 4. And should Robesi Ramirez, the man from whom Espinoza won the title, beats Brandon Benitez tomorrow night on ESPN, we'll likely get a rematch of 2023's Upset of the Year, which also happened to be a contender for Fight of the Year. So I'm looking forward to that fight and potentially the fight down the road.
All right, we got a couple of previews.
We do. And on DAZN, the main event is going to have Juan Francisco Estrada versus Jesse Bam Rodriguez for Estrada's WBC Super Flyweight title. For more than a decade, the 115-pound class has been ruled by a miniature version of the Four Kings, you might say, in Carlos Cuadras, Rizaquetz Rungvisai, Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez, and Juan Francisco Estrada. But over the past 2+ years, Bam has formed a bond with all of them. He defeated Cuadras to win this very title in February 2022. He defended it against Sor Rungvisai 4 months later, and in preparation for this fight, he has sparred with Chocolatito. Estrada won this very belt that was vacated by Bam. Bam moved down to 112. He won 2 titles there, and now is coming back up to challenge Estrada. Unfortunately, Estrada is 34 years old. He's coming off a very long layoff, I think a little over 18 months. And Bam is coming off a very good performance against Sonny Edwards. So while the styles, I think, will mesh very well, I expect Bam to be victorious, and I wouldn't be surprised if he becomes the first man to stop Estrada.
How old is Bam?
I think he's 24.
Yeah. There's like a big age difference. So you think he might stop him?
He might stop him if he really gets going. Well, you're probably wondering why we put up what we just put up. And the reason why is this. Every so often we hear about tornado warnings, which means that the conditions are present for one to happen. They may not always happen, but the conditions are there. And that's how I see tomorrow night's ESPN main event between WBO 140-pound champion Teofimo Lopez and number 10 rated Steve Claggett. And here's why I feel this way. Teofimo's performances at 140 have been inconsistent. He was impressive against Pedro Campa and Josh Taylor, but not so impressive against Sandor Martin and Jermaine Ortiz, the man he defeated over 12 rounds in February. He really hasn't been the same dynamic performer at 140 than he was at 135. We're not seeing the one-punch knockouts. We're not seeing the video game dances. We're not seeing the same swagger as before. After the Sandor Martin fight, he actually asked aloud, "Do I still got it?" Well, against Josh Taylor, he still had it, and he had enough of it to beat Ortiz. But now, as for Claggett, yes, he's 35 years old, and yes, he has a record of 38-7-2 with 26 knockouts. Pretty modest record. But he's on a career-high 9-fight winning streak, and he knows that this could be his one and only shot at the brass ring. What he brings to this fight is extreme pressure and extreme work rate. He can make a ring become very small with his ability to cut it off. And in his last 4 fights, he has averaged nearly 103 punches per round compared to Teofimo's 38.9 in his 4 fights at 140. If Claggett can get off to his typically fast start, he will force Teofimo to fight much harder than he wants. And because Claggett has been able to maintain this fast pace from start to finish, he could tire Teofimo out and get the win.
Okay, well, wait a minute. Also, hold it.
There.
Hold it, though, before you move on. Also, though, couldn't this be the kind of style that brings out the best in Teofimo? And he's got a guy right there to hit. He's got power. Could it also go the other way where this might be the perfect recipe for one of those dynamic Teofimo Lopez knockouts that we haven't seen
It's
in a
possible.
while.
It's possible. And that's probably the reason why I'm not going to outright predict the upset. The conditions
The climate looks there, but you're not going to go out and say, hey, you're not saying the tornado is going to hit. You're saying the climate is there for that.
Well, yeah, precisely. And here's why I didn't pull the trigger and go all the way and predict a Claggett upset. Teofimo's not overlooking this man. I saw some quotes in preview stories that indicate that he respects Claggett. He respects the danger that he presents. And because of that respect, I believe that he will prepare himself accordingly. He's 9 years younger. He's fought much better competition. And at his best, he is a pound-for-pound talent. And remember, Teofimo's best performance at 140 came against a pressure fighter in Pedro Campa. Campa had no defense. Claggett has pretty good defense, and he has a pretty good chin. But Teofimo's a very smart fighter, and if anybody can slow down this freight train, he can. It's not going to be easy, but I see Teofimo winning on points. But if Claggett beats him, remember the tornado warning.
Okay. And on that, we will go to a break and let the storm clouds subside as we prepare for Wally Matthews, Hall of Fame journalist, joins us right after this.
I got two options. Option one, I can accept defeat. Option two, I can get up. I can get tougher. I can get faster. I can get stronger. And then I go get mine. I made my choice. Have you made yours?
Back on In This Corner, the podcast 125, and we are joined by a gentleman that I've known for quite some time. He has been an outstanding journalist for over 40 years, and when you look at his resume, Lee always talks about my versatility. This is a guy that rivals me with that for everything that he's done. He's the only living sports writer to have hit the Grand Slam writing for the New York Times, the New York Post, the New York Daily News, and Newsday. He's also written for Sports Illustrated and so many others in television. He's been there with CBS Sports Channel versus ESPN, with NBC covering the 88 and 92 Olympics. He's been the president of the Boxing Writers Association of America, won that Nat Flasher Award for Excellence in Broadcast Journalism, and that all put him in the 2024 International Boxing Hall of Fame as an inductee. He is Wally Matthews. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing good, Smitty. Smitty, that intro sounded like my obit. My God, my resume is so old it was written with chisels, like on stone tablets, I think.
And you're going to get a chance to, I know a lot of this stuff, but I want you to take us through, if you will. I'm just going to toss it to you for a second. Take us through. You were born in New York.
I was.
With that accent. If you're not, then something's really off kilter. But
what
I
accent?
want you to.
You have an accent.
Yeah, well, mine's Miami, baby. I want you to take us through how you got into, I know you fought as an amateur, boxed as an amateur, but I want you to take us through all of that in journalism and when the boxing bug bit you. So give us a little lead in, if you will, to the Wally Matthews story.
Sure. The boxing bug bit me when I was about 4 years old. What year was, and Lee will know this right off the bat, what year was the first Patterson-Liston fight?
1962.
Okay, so I was 5 then. My dad loved Floyd Patterson, favorite fighter of all time. And we lived in a fifth floor walk up in Astoria. And he wanted to listen to the fight because it was on radio back then. And the radio wouldn't work. And my dad was like an inveterate tinkerer. And he took the radio apart and he had all these pieces out all over everything. And he was trying to put it back together. Finally, he gave up. He said, I'm going to go downstairs and listen to it in the car. So he's running down these 5 flights of steps. You know, the upshot of the story, he starts the car and the fight is over because it only lasted like 2 minutes and 6 seconds. But that was that's when I first became aware that boxing was a thing. that my dad liked boxing, and and I knew about Floyd Patterson and Sonny Liston. And not long after that, I had a brother who's about 2 years younger than me, so he was smaller, and so he was my favorite sparring partner. He was like, he was easy. He was easy pickings. We used to fight all the time. And one day, my dad brought home two pairs of boxing gloves and said, "If you guys are going to kill each other, do it with these." And it's been with me ever since. I was in the Golden Gloves when I was 18 and 19 years old in New York, and then after I got my jaw broken in sparring, I decided, you know what, this is fun, but it might not be the best thing for my future. So I continued to box, but I decided I'm going to go a different way with my life. And I went to school and I studied journalism. And then I did not get, what happened was I applied for an internship at Newsday. I did not get it. Some guy named Tom Verducci beat me out. I don't know what he's doing now. He's probably out of the business.
What a fluke.
But in any event, yeah. So anyway, they kept my application on file, and they called me a couple of months later and said, "Hey, if you're interested, we have part-time jobs here. You want to come in and take high school scores?" I said, "Yeah, sure." So I did that, and while I was doing it, I got to know Bob Waters, who was the legendary Newsday boxing writer. He was one of three boxing writers in the United States who picked a kid named Cassius Clay to beat Sonny Liston. Right. I mean, this guy really knew his boxing. He befriended me and vice versa. And whenever he couldn't make it to an event, I always jumped in. I would volunteer, and he'd say, "Let the kid do it." So the kid would do it. And after I was there about 2 years as a part-time taking scores and occasionally doing some boxing, they promoted me to boxing writer. And that was 1985. And here we are just about 40 years later.
Do you remember the first fight that you sat ringside and covered?
That's a good question.
Or if it's too obscure, maybe the first big one. I'm sure you remember that.
I'll tell you what, they sent me to the fight between Terrence Ali and Harry Arroyo in Atlantic City. I think that one may have been 84. I was doing the fights. By that point, I was doing all the fights at the Felt Forum in New York, which is now the Paramount. So I got to do that one in Atlantic City. I did a Mark Medal fight at the Felt Forum. I did a bunch of Buddy McGirt fights. I ran Barkley. These are the guys that I grew up doing. The first major fight that I was at ringside for was Hagler Hearns, which wasn't a bad one to start with.
No, that is.
What I'm told, that was a pretty good fight.
Yeah. I got a little emotional the other day because it was Colonel Bob Sheridan's birthday, and Bob was one that, and I know you knew everybody knew the Colonel. I know you have Colonel stories too.
Actually, I drank with him, which was an experience in itself.
Well, that could do bodily damage, or certainly liver damage.
Sure as hell was fun though.
Yeah, oh yeah, and he was one. But I want to ask you, what writers, whether it was somebody you worked with or somebody like a Jimmy Cannon, were there guys that inspired you?
Absolutely. Well, when I was a kid, I read Dick Young and I read Jimmy Cannon and I read Waters. I never thought I'd get to know any of these people. And luckily for me, 2 out of the 3, I never met Jimmy Cannon. I never met Red Smith, but I mean, Waters and Young became friends of mine. And one thing I think I said this, I may have said it at the Boxing Hall of Fame induction, but the boxing press was so welcoming to me. And I was a young kid. I was kind of an arrogant bastard. I mean, I thought I knew everything. And yeah, believe it or not. But these guys took me under their wing. Guys like Ed Schuyler, Michael Katz, Pat Putnam, Barney Nagler.
All the names I got on this list.
Yeah, I became friends with Bud Schulberg. I mean, guys that you would just not believe. Jack Fisk out in San Francisco. Guys from England, Hugh McIlvanney, Reg Gutteridge, Colin Hart. These guys.
Mike Marley.
Well, Marley and I were kind of rivals. We got
I know it. I know. That's why I brought that up.
An uneasy friendship because we were certainly similar kinds of writers.
Yeah.
And
on that note, before I flip to Lee, just I always say to fighters, describe yourself as a pugilist. How do you describe yourself? It obviously evolved during your long career, and maybe it's still evolving. I know I am as a broadcaster. How do you describe yourself coming up into where you are now?
Well, yeah, all right. I've definitely evolved. I've become a lot more analytical and a lot less, I think, judgmental than I was back then. But I will tell you this. I think the best description of me came from Ed Schuyler on a bar stool at the Flame one night in Las Vegas. And we were all having a drink. And, Ed could be very paternalistic at times. And he put his arm around me and he said, you're not a bad kid, but your problem is you think if you're not pissing somebody off, you're not doing your job. And I said, you're goddamn right. So that was how I started out. I felt like the thing to do was to go after the bad guys and go after them hard. A lot of times I saw things just in black and white, and I don't mean in terms of race. I mean in terms of like, this person is good, this person is bad, and there was no in between. And sometimes I made some bad judgments. I'll admit that. But I felt like, in fact, I once said this to Tyson, in a like I said, I could be an arrogant prick. I said to him, I'm the Tyson of boxing writers, because I felt like, I'm going in there for the KO. That's it.
Yeah.
I would walk in, I'm not even, I'm kind of embarrassed to admit this, but I would walk into a press room before a fight and think, I'm going to outright every one of you motherfuckers tonight.
Yeah.
That's the way I thought. And I know that the fighters are going to their dressing rooms and thinking the same thing. I'm going to go in and kill this guy tonight.
Yeah.
I felt the same way. It was kind of like a competition. This is when I was young. I mean, I don't feel that way anymore. Obviously, I'm not capable of it anymore. I'm too old. But I did. I did kind of look at it as a competition and a fight and something I needed to win every single night.
Yeah, it actually warms my heart to hear that, because when I started my television show, which is somehow still on the air after 20 years in this corner, because I fought professionally, I wanted to separate myself and actually be better and different, do something nobody else could do. And that's why I've been in the ring with 65 of the fighters on my show trying to. So I always had that. I always had that mentality like you. Even though we were journalists and we're covering these athletes, we had an edge to us. But I think that's also what made you so good.
Well, because we're competitive by nature.
Yeah. Yeah. And on that, I flip it to Lee Groves.
Well, you talk about being competitive with the other writers. It seems to me that now that you've been inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame, sounds like you won, right?
Oh, I don't know about that. I mean, there's plenty of really good writers. I mean, Katz is in there, Borges is in there, Schuyler's in there. These guys were all my mentors, so I wouldn't say I won. I mean, in a way, it's gratifying that somebody thinks I deserve to be on the same plane with them. But I mean, I'm going to be honest with you guys. I was reluctant even to accept the honor because I didn't think I deserved it, quite honestly. I was like, first of all, writers shouldn't be in there. This is about the fighters. The reason why the building exists is because of the fighters. Nobody goes to the arena to watch me write about the fight.
Yeah,
all right,
Wally, if people aren't telling their stories and being honest, then the public doesn't know. So you are.
I understand that.
Yeah.
I get it. But I mean, like I said, those guys to me were my idols. I'd read Michael Katz and want to write like him. I'd read Putnam and would try to, I try to get inside, like, how was he able to describe this so well? I saw the fight and this is exactly what I saw, and he wrote it, and how can I do that? And to think that I'm on the same wall with those guys, and I'm not being falsely modest, because I'm not falsely modest. I'm being honest with you. It's just amazing. It's I still haven't wrapped my head around it completely.
Well, getting the phone call from the hall is one of those moments in life that one remembers exactly where they were and what they were doing. So paint the picture for us.
All right.
When you heard about your induction, what was going on?
I tell you what, I now I work in a gym now. I run a boxing program at the Huntington YMCA, which is a few miles from my house. And I was there working. And while I was teaching my class, I guess Ed Brophy called, and I saw after the class that I had a voicemail from Ed Brophy, and I was like, I haven't talked to Ed Brophy in 30 years. What the hell does he want? So, I listened to the voicemail and I was like, holy Jesus. And then I actually said this at the banquet the night before the induction. I said, to this day, I still think he dialed the wrong number. He's just been too nice to tell me that he made a mistake. Like, what the hell are you calling me for? So, yes, I do remember exactly where I was. And, I'm going to say something that's this is very personal. When I got hired at Newsday got hired full time at Newsday in 1985, when the boss brought me in and said, I'm going to make you my boxing writer. It's like the best day of my life to that point. I hadn't had children or anything. The first person I called was my dad, because he was a great boxing fan. When I walked out, I went into like a hallway and I called my dad. I said, you're not going to believe this. I got hired. And one of my regrets was that my dad is not here anymore for me to call and tell him that. So I called my wife. It was fine. It was it was an acceptable substitute.
And as great as induction weekend was for you as one of the members being honored, how much more special was it that Nick Charles, with whom you worked on the boxing series that aired on Versus, was also being honored? He's your class.
Oh, that made it great. I mean, honestly, to go in with Nick was just amazing. I mean, Nick, I didn't work with Nick for a long time. I worked with him for about 1 year, but you didn't have, I had known him, obviously, from being around, and he was just such a good-hearted guy. First of all, he was consummate professional, always prepared. I mean, we would go to the fighter meetings the morning of the fight, and he would come prepared with a list of questions. He'd get to the bottom of everything, but he also had a way about him that the fighters felt like he was going to be fair with them and that he liked them. And he did. He loved boxers. He really respected them. And he had, I mean, I know people say this about those of, their friends with passed away. He just had a joy about him. He was always happy. He was always laughing. And I had told the story to Corey, his widow. I said, one time we were in Manchester, and I didn't know what the hell we were going to do. We were going to do a Ricky Hatton fight there. And he calls me up one morning. He goes, I got to take you to this cappuccino place that I found. I'm like, okay. And he found so much joy in this cappuccino, which was pretty damn good, I must admit. It was a very good cup of coffee. But I mean, it was something you could get anywhere. But he was just so happy that he had found this place. And we sat there on a bench. It was a beautiful morning. I think it was in July. And we drank this cappuccino. And I was just looking at him going, I wish I could be as happy every day as this man seems to be.
I love calling fights with him. I also loved post-fight with him because it mean we were going to get into some really good wine. I didn't care what kind of, as long as it was red, I would drink it. But Nick really knew he was a connoisseur of wine.
Oh yeah, I always left that up to him. It's like, you choose. I know you're going to do the right thing, and I'm a red wine drinker too, so everything was that was just about right.
We're chatting with International Boxing Hall of Fame journalist Wally Matthews. Lee, continue.
I remember your broadcasting career very well, and one of the most memorable assignments to me was the boxing competition at the 1992 Barcelona Olympics for the NBC Triplecast. I believe it's the Red Channel that boxing was on. And that particular competition was fraught with controversy due to the new computerized scoring system that made its debut there. What were your memories of doing the games in general, and what were some of the events that you recall most strongly?
Well, the one I really remember is the '88 Olympics when I worked for NBC, because we had so many controversies there. You had Andrew Maynard missing the bus. You had Roy Jones getting ripped off. You had the fans chasing the Australian referee to the airport, basically sent him home because they didn't like him stopping the fight. I mean, it was just a crazy Olympics. And the thing that I really remember is interviewing Roy Jones in the ring right after the Park Si-Hun fight, and the tears streaming down his face because he was so upset that he had been robbed of that decision. And the other thing that I remember about that one, and I'll go to '92 in a second, but my memories there are not as strong because it just wasn't quite as big a deal. But I also recall how great it was when Ray Mercer won the heavyweight title. It was just such a lift for that team, and I don't know if you could see them behind me hanging on my door there. Those are the gloves that Ray Mercer used to knock out his opponent and win the gold medal. He gave
and Ray Mercer was with you at at the induction too. He was there with us.
Yes. And I offered him the gloves back, and he said, no, man, you keep them. So I said, all right, you know what? I'm going to donate them to the hall. And he said, no, please don't do that. Please keep them. So I'm going to keep them.
They look good right there. They're perfect shot.
Yeah, good. I'm glad you could see them. Yeah. And the '92 Olympics, I mean, I became very close with both De La Hoya and Raul Marquez, two great guys, and then I'm trying to remember who else is on that team. I know that De La Hoya won the gold medal, and I mean, yes, the computerized system. I think the final score of the match was like 7-3 or something. It was like 2. It was ridiculous.
It really was.
And I hated it, quite honestly. I did not like it. I mean, I don't need. And I love Bob and Logan, like brothers. I'm talking about Bob Canobio and Logan Hobson, who invented CompuBox and have made, a great, Bob especially made a great business of it. But I understand boxing had a dearth of statistics. It wasn't like baseball. You didn't really have a lot of numbers to break down. But I don't need the numbers to know who's winning the fight. right? You don't need the numbers. And I think, it's great for them. And I think boxing has benefited from having them. However, I do think that a lot of people who pass for boxing analysts now substitute using the numbers for really knowing what the hell they're watching.
And
I
that's
hear it
what's
all the
good
time.
about,
Well, he landed 22 punches in that round.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean shit. Okay.
Yeah.
It means something to an extent, but if you land 22 punches on me and I knock you out with the only punch I throw in the round, I think that would be the deciding factor.
And I got to tell you something, Lee and I, better than anybody out there by far, because I rely on my eyes, my blink instinct. Bert Sugar paid me one of the best compliments ever. And I got,
Bert Sugar paid you? Wait a minute. Because he still owes me money.
A compliment saying that I had perhaps the best eyes, but Lee works for CompuBox, and we have done this thing where we go back and forth. And I think what you're saying, and I agree with you, when it's used as an instrument to help out to whatever, I think it works fantastic.
It's a useful tool, but it's not a substitute for analysis.
Right. But the problem is, as Roger Mayweather said so many times, and especially today, most of the boxing writers today don't know shit about boxing. You happen to. You also fought. You boxed in the amateurs.
Well, you know what Bill Clancy once told me? He said, you don't need judges for a fight. He said, just get a bunch of kids to stand in front of the ring and they will tell you who won the fight. Because they will not be influenced by, any kind of prior knowledge. It's going to look at it and say, well, that guy beat up that guy. And
it's amazing that we still have the incompetency even today. And we bitch about it all the time. There are journalists, some that I won't mention their names, I'll be kind to them, I'll tell them to their face, which I do, that will say this fight was this or that. They can't even name the 4 criteria to score a fight. So how are they judging the fight? But I know, Lee, you got a couple more questions.
Well, before I go to the next subject, I wanted to bring up a personal memory of your coverage of the 1992 Olympics. And there was this Romanian boxer named Leonard Doroftai, whose body attack impressed you so much that you called him Smokin' Joe Doroftai.
I did? Wow.
Yes.
Mr. Groves, you are amazing. I had no memory of that, but okay, I'll take it. It's not bad.
But he went on to turn pro as Leonard Dorian, and he became a champion at lightweight. Wow. So
we had a tough time with that Olympics. I'll tell you what, we didn't get a lot of we didn't have a lot of time. See, in the 88 Olympics, that was a different kind of Olympics. We had a lot of access to the fighters and we got to know them before the bouts. In 92, they weren't happy with the way we covered 88 NBC, and neither was the Olympic Committee. So we were kind of kept away from the fighters. And a lot of times all we had was a sheet of paper with the guy's name, what country he came from, and his record. And from there, we just had to wing it, just watch the fight and see what happens there. And Bobby Papa is, obviously a terrific blow-by-blow man, and we got through it, but it was difficult. So I don't remember Leonard Doroftai, but thank you for bringing that up.
Well, Bob Papa was an expert also at pronunciation, especially of those difficult Thai fighters or whatever. It would just roll.
He's a hardworking guy, and I will tell you this: he had never called a fight before he and I started doing Sports Channel America. Wow. In fact, we met each other the first day that we worked together.
Wow.
I think we may have been in Corpus Christi with, some Duva fighters or something or other. And, we just met, we hit it off. We liked each other. He had never done a fight, but he's just such a pro at broadcasting. He was just able to pick it up. And he knew in boxing anyway, I think he's a great football announcer as well. He knew when to get out of the way,
Yeah.
I'm here with an analyst. I've never done a fight before. Here are the two guys. Tell me what's happening. And, you love to work with a guy like that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. During your induction speech, you mentioned that the weekend was an opportunity for you to reconnect with your boxing roots because you were away from the sport for a while.
I was.
First, what were the reasons for your departure from boxing? And second, tell us about the process of reconnecting that you experienced during the Hall of Fame weekend.
All right. Well, here's the deal. When I was with Newsday in the beginning, I was purely a boxing writer for about 10 years. Then they offered me a column job, and I turned it down because I just loved doing boxing. I wasn't really interested in going to baseball games and football games and the Kentucky Derby. I mean, I know it's a dream job for most sports writers. To me, all I wanted to do was the fights. So I turned it down. And about a year later, they came back to me again, and somebody wiser than me said, if you don't take it now, they ain't never going to give it to you, and you'll never be a columnist. So I took it. And when you become a columnist, it turns out that you don't do as much boxing. And I learned this right off the bat, because the same week that I was made a columnist was the Pernell Whitaker Chavez fight in San Antonio. Was in San Antonio?
San
right?
Antonio,
Yeah.
93.
And I was not
there.
sent there.
Yeah.
That's
probably
I didn't go.
when you and I met. That's probably when we met. If you
No,
were there.
I wasn't there. That
okay.
was the point of being a columnist. They had two other columnists who had seniority, and one of them had put Joe Gergen, who was a great friend of mine, a terrific columnist, said, hey, I'd like to go to the fight. Okay, you go to that. Matthews, you go to a Met game that week or whatever. So right away I realized this is going to be different, and I did less boxing from then on. And then, as you know, Lee, I mean, papers started cutting back on boxing coverage, probably like right after the De La Hoya era. No longer had nobody had a boxing writer anymore. Very few papers had a guy who just did boxing, right? It used to be you take the best writer on your staff, and I'm not saying that in my case, but you'd put Red Smith on boxing, you'd put Michael Katz, you'd put Jimmy Breslin, you'd put the guys who really could write on boxing. By the time the 2000s came around, it was like, just send some kid who's not doing anything this week. We don't care about this fight. So that took me out of the game pretty much. And then when I left Newsday in 2010 and went to ESPN, I became a baseball beat writer. That's what they offered me. They weren't really covering boxing. They had a boxing guy. They were happy with him. They said, look, we got a good job for you. We'll pay you a lot of money, but you're gonna cover the Yankees. So at let me think of how old I was. 53 years old. It's okay. I will now follow a baseball team. And I got to tell you, I loved it. I really did. I liked it. I liked the experience of being with the team all the time. One thing I learned is that
a little more structure than pugilism.
Not only that, when you're a columnist, it's funny because the columnist is the guy who's supposed to have a perspective on everything, right? He's like the be all end all. He comes down with the tablets and tells you everything. Columnist doesn't know shit. You know why? The columnist comes in, he parachutes into the ball game that day. He sees a sliver of the event. He just sees one day, a snapshot, and now he writes a column where like he's an expert. Okay. And I realized that what I had been doing those previous years, I didn't know what the hell I was writing about. I really didn't. All I knew was what I saw that day. This guy sucked today. Okay, I'm going to rip him. This guy was great today. He's the greatest player since Babe Ruth. When you're around the team every day, it changes your entire perspective. It really does, because you see why things happen. You see why guys, behave the way they do, the way, why they play the way they do, why managers make the decisions that they make. When you're a columnist, you just jump in for that day. You don't have any of that background. You're just writing about what you saw that day. And I really liked the experience of being around the team. And I did it for 10 years. And I really think that I became a better writer and a better reporter doing that. Did I miss boxing? Hell yeah. And I said, Lee, that goes back to your question. I missed it a lot. I missed the people. Baseball people are not the same. They're really not. You're talking about a group of athletes, especially nowadays, that has pretty much been pampered since they were children. Most of them have been groomed for Major League Baseball since like they 12, because they're so much better than everybody else in Little League. So they get, moved to the front of the line. They get pampered. They're used to, having everybody kissing their asses. Boxers are not like that. Boxers literally are scrapping for their lives all the way to the top until you get to be Floyd Mayweather or Pacquiao or Muhammad Ali. But even then, they still most of them remain down to earth because
that's why I call them, Wally.
Factor.
Yeah, that's why I call them the most common and uncommon of all athletes, the fighters. But I will caution you on this because and this is something we talk about. Lee tries to keep me sane on this. For a great example.
It's a big job, by the way.
I shouldn't tell this story, but a couple of weeks ago, last week, I went and sat ringside at the Benavidez fight and the Tank fight. And the reason I did is because Samson Lukowicz gave me a ticket, and I was walking by standing outside the press room and taking pictures and talking to people and whatever. But a lot of the people in there were saying, "Why aren't you in here?" And it's because it's not the same, Wally. It's not the same as it was.
I know that.
It's not the same as when it was with Katz and with Schuyler and with Putnam and with you and with Saraceno and with Marley and with Joe Maxey comes to other guys and people, and it's because these journalists, they're not even, they're pugilistic pups, I call them. They don't even know what that typewriter is back there that I have in the background. Yeah. They don't know what you put into actually having to prepare for, to do a story. There's a thing called, where we had to go to libraries. There was time before there were these cell phones. And so I can caution you, it is not the same as the camaraderie that we had back in the day. And well, I don't think it'll ever be there again.
The camaraderie, I'm sure the access to the athletes is not the same either.
No, it's not. And
I would go to, I'd go to the training camp, a month before the fight and hang out with the fighter and have breakfast with them. So I went running with some of the fighters.
Yeah.
You'd really get to know them. I bet you can't do that anymore.
No, I realize it's totally. But I do us a favor, if you will, because you're now a Hall of Famer as a right. Talk about, just give an example of preparing for a fight. Purnell signs to fight Chavez. You find out, let's say you're getting that assignment. What would go into from the time you found out you were covering a fight to covering that fight? And then, of course, you're on deadline. If you will, give us the Reader's Digest version of that.
All right. So, let's say Tyson and Spinks signed to fight on June 27th. You find out in April. Now, there's a press conference. So we go to the press conference, talk to both fighters. Then you find out where each of them are going to training camp. And now you're going back to your editor and saying, listen, I think I want to spend a week with Spinks in May and a week with Tyson in the beginning of June. Okay, let's work out the budget. Let's see, how long can you do that? Okay, great. Where's this guy training? Oh, this one's going to be in Atlantic City. The other one's going to be up in the Catskills. Okay. So now you would go, and this is when boxing was truly important. You would get to a training camp on a Monday and you'd write every day that week, every single day. You'd spend one day with the trainer. You'd spend maybe a day with the manager. You'd spend as much time with the fighter as you could. You'd talk to the sparring partners. By the time the fight came around, you felt like you knew every aspect of both of their lives. Right. And, the thing I used to tell my journalism class is that, sometimes you do all this work for nothing, like the Tyson Spinks fight. I spent 9 days in Atlantic City, which was not my favorite city, not by a long shot. And then the fight lasted 91 seconds. It's like, what have I done with my life for the past 9 days? But that was the life of a boxing writer. You didn't just show up the day of the fight and say, okay, the guy in the black trunks is this guy and the guy in the red trunks is that. You knew by that point, you knew everybody in both corners. You knew their friends, you knew their families, you knew where their wives were sitting, where, if the wife was here and the girlfriend was there, you knew all of this stuff because you were around it and you were allowed to be around it. And to your point, I covered a few fights as a freelancer when I was doing the Yankees, and I think it was probably the first Wilder Ortiz fight in Barclays. And after the fight, like the first 5 questions began with, "Champ, you're marvelous. Can I tell you how great you are?" This is not the world I grew up in. I grew up in the world where the night Tim Witherspoon got knocked out by Bone Crusher Smith, right? I'm sure you remember this very well. The first round, right, at the Garden. Right. Dick Young goes, he goes, "Timmy, did you train for the fight? You got tits." Witherspoon looks at him, doesn't know what to say, and he goes, "Well, Dick, you got tits too." You would never hear an exchange like that these days. No. Everybody, there's a lot of ass kissing, and if you're asking a question that's tough, you're considered a hater, and the family shouts you down, and the friends start yelling at you. It's just a completely different world than it was back then.
Lee, tell him why, because you know how much I believe in karma. Tell him, because you were smiling. Tell Wally what's come after we let him go in a second. Tell him what's coming up next.
Well, we're going to do a Memories and Moments segment. And because this particular fight, by the time this airs, it's 1 day past the 36th anniversary of it, Mike Tyson versus Michael Spinks.
How about
all
that?
The fights?
You can give it more than 91 seconds? It's not
the one that went 91 seconds.
My dear friend Jeffrey Osborne, my dear friend Jeffrey Osborne's anthem was longer than the damn fight.
Yeah, well, you know what, though? We always timed the national anthem at a Tyson fight and then we would have a pool at ringside. Will it go longer than the anthem or not?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, I will tell you this. I love Michael Spinks. Loved him like a brother. Loved Butch Lewis. They were very good friends of mine. And I picked him to win that fight. I picked him to beat Tyson because I thought Tyson was a normal human being. And I thought that anybody going through a divorce and being accused of all the things that were going on in his life and splitting with his managers has got to be like a little bit out of his head in this fight. And he's not going to be there. So I picked Spinks to win.
And
obviously.
Mike Tyson absolutely loved Wally Matthews all the time, didn't he?
Yeah, we were very tight.
Didn't he threaten you one time?
Nah, yeah, but it's no big deal. I've been threatened before. Anyway, I'm sitting there at ringside. I'm like right in where Spinks's corner is. He's coming up the steps, and I hear him distinctly say, "I'm just going to do the best I can."
I remember that.
At which point, I realized my pick was not going to work out.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Yeah, it was
not a good indication.
I'm going to end this interview with you like I end all the interviews with all the fighters on my television show, but I'll change the wording a little bit. How does Wally Matthews want to be remembered as a boxing journalist and more importantly as a man? You're not leaving us yet, but that's my. How do you want to be remembered as a boxing journalist and a man?
Have you seen my X-rays or my? Would you see my X-rays or my blood tests?
You're fine.
What's going on? Yeah, I'd like to be remembered as fair as a boxing writer. I mean, it wasn't always right. I was wrong plenty of times. I just gave you, the most embarrassing example of it. I just want everybody to know that when I wrote something, I believed it. I never had an agenda. I wrote things because this is what I thought was going to happen, and this is what I thought was true. As a man, I just want to be known as a good husband and father.
Yeah. And on that note, I was real, when Lee and I, because I host the Hall of Fame now since 2016.
Yeah, I saw you do it last week.
Yeah, but it was really.
You were very good at it too, by the way.
Thank you, appreciate that. But it means something extra when, somebody that is I consider like a friend and a pal and somebody that I really respect gets to be honored and have his moment in the sun, which goes on for immortality. So I'm real proud of you, and I thank you for joining us on In This Corner. And again, congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be on with both of you guys.
Wally Matthews. We'll come back and we're going to take more than 91 seconds to dissect in great detail what happened with Tyson and Spinks. We'll be back.
I got two options. Option one, I can accept defeat. Option two, I can get up. I can get tougher. I can get faster. I can get stronger. And then I go get mine. I made my choice. Have you made yours?
Back, final segment in this corner of the podcast, 125. One of my favorite segments when we do it, memories and moments. And this one didn't have a lot of moments, only about 91 seconds, but it certainly created a lot of memories. I'm talking about Mike Tyson, unbeaten at the time, taking on unbeaten Michael Spinks at the time, heavyweight champion versus light heavyweight champion. Take it away, Lee.
Well, actually, like the first fight between Joe Frazier and Muhammad Ali, Spinks and Tyson, they were undefeated, and they each had a legitimate claim to the heavyweight championship.
Yeah.
Tyson held all the alphabet hardware thanks to his wins over WBC champion Trevor Berbick, WBA titleist James Bone Crusher Smith, and IBF king Tony Tucker. The WBO had yet to crown its first heavyweight champion, so he was undisputed. Spinks was the man who beat the man in Larry Holmes.
Right.
He was stripped of the IBF title for refusing to fight Tucker, who subsequently won the IBF title, and Mike Tyson defeated him. And instead of fighting Tucker, Spinks fought Jerry Cooney, who he knocked out in 5 rounds. And it had been nearly a year since Spinks stopped Cooney. But more than a few experts, and one of them we had on the show just now, Wally Matthews, thought that Spinks had a legitimate chance of winning the fight. He had quirky boxing skills. He showed them off in his 2 fights against Larry Holmes. He scored a knockout against Stefan Tagstad, and he knocked out Jerry Cooney as well. So they thought he had speed and power, and Tyson had a history of having problems with guys like James Quick Tillis and Mitch Blood Green. Tony Tucker went all 12 rounds, hurt him in the first round of that fight. But once the bell sounded, it was all Tyson. A savage left uppercut scored the first knockdown, and then his very next punch, a right hand, ended the fight 91 seconds after it began. And with that, Tyson became the last undisputed heavyweight champion of the 20th century. Coming in, I thought Tyson would win despite all of the personal problems that he was having with the fight. And you could see, as Wally said, Spinks was petrified. And a story, according to one story, the dressing rooms were next to each other and the walls were pretty thin. Mike Tyson liked to warm up by banging his gloves against the wall, and it made such a cacophony that Spinks went, uh-oh, and then the rest is history. I thought that Tyson would win, but I had no idea it was going to last just 91 seconds. Now, both of us have personal memories about this fight. And for me, the shenanigans between the WBA, WBC, and IBF provided the backdrop for what would become the first feature article I ever wrote for Ring Magazine, which can be seen in the December 1988 issue. It was actually the culmination of one of the dreams that I had professionally, and that's to have a feature article in Ring Magazine. But as usual, you have an even stronger connection to this historic event. You were there.
Yeah.
And tell us about your experiences there.
Yeah, I was at that fight. It was one of the first ones I was able to. I was just a young radio broadcaster in Fort Myers, Florida. I'm trying to think if I had even, maybe I had gone national by that point with Talk America Radio Network, but I went there. I did some live remotes. My cousin Kenny tagged along with me as my bodyguard because everybody knew I'd need to. I was pretty wild back then. One of the great memories about it was before the fight. My favorite singer was Jeffrey Osborne, and I mentioned in the last segment, Jeffrey was with a group called LTD, and he became a solo vocalist on The Wings of Love and so many other great songs, Love Ballad, and I'm sitting there at a bar with my cousin, and lo and behold, Jeffrey walks by, and I ran up to him and gave him I'm thinking I had so many different business cards over my career. Nobody has business cards anymore, I don't think. And lo and behold, Jeffrey and I would become, great friends. I was on my show many, many, many times. At my radio show, did live remotes with me and counseled me during rough times in my marriage. My ex-wife, Kim, and I got to know him well as well. He did the anthem, and again, the anthem was longer than the fight. I remember later on in life doing a radio interview in Fort Myers with Michael Spinks, and we were doing a live remote from a bar, an outdoor bar, and I remember when they would bump me back in with music, and the music was Jeffrey Osborne. And I remember, being in a great mood. There might even have been an alcoholic beverage or two around us. And I said, welcome back. In fact, it was Frazier and Michael Spinks. And I said, welcome back to the program. We've got Joe Frazier and Michael. You probably recognize that sound. That's Jeffrey Osborne. His anthem was longer than your fight. Ha, ha, ha. And then I realized what I had just said. Oh. And Joe gave me a look like, did he just say that? And Michael Spinks, being the great guy that he is, he just laughed it off. What a gentleman, thank gosh. Yeah. And I would later on do, of course, sit-down interviews with Mike Tyson and in a classic in-ring on In This Corner, and a great interview where Michael Spinks actually broke down and was in tears. But my memories of that, just was the whole event and the fact of coming inside, the fighters coming inside the ring. I think Michael Spinks came out to Kenny Loggins, "This is it."
Yep.
And Mike Tyson came out with this eerie, it was just sounds. It wasn't a song, or at least it was just sounds. I never got to ask Mike what it was, but it just created this, like you say, cacophony. And then he gets in there, but you could see, and I love Michael Spinks. He's one of the great light heavyweight fighters of all time, and what he would accomplish in the heavyweight division. He's an all-time great, of course. But I think he was beaten way before he got in that ring that night. And despite all that Robin Givens and Don King and everybody else did, and everything else going on in the mind of Mike Tyson that would soon after that become unraveled, Spinks had no shot whatsoever. And he froze. He got nailed with a body shot, went down, and then he fought back, and the rest is 91-second history. But because of everything that went into that and that you described there, it's something that we'll remember those 91 seconds forever. And it might have been after that where Mike Tyson was considered seemingly invincible at that time. And again, nobody is invincible. Not even this show. And that means we are out of time. Great stuff there. We want to thank Hall of Famer, my pal Wally Matthews, for joining us. We'll talk to you next week. So long, everybody.